Welcome back to God's Truth Daily. And let's see today's verse. Today's verse is Galatians 5:14. And this verse says, "For the whole law can be summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself." So Paul here, he's saying that the whole law can be summed up in one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Let's go back just a little bit. Verse 13 of this chapter, Galatians 5:13, this says, "For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters. But don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love." And then we have today's verse, "For the whole law can be summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself." And it goes on in verse 15, "But if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out, beware of destroying one another." So Paul, here he's saying that we should love your neighbor as yourself. Love our neighbor as ourselves. What does that mean? Well, love people just like you want to be loved. Just like you love yourself, you should love other people. Love your neighbor. And that doesn't mean your next door neighbor. That doesn't mean the person who sits next to you. That doesn't mean just your literal neighbor. It means your other people. Other people in your life. When it says you love your neighbor as yourself, it means love other people like you love yourself. Love other people like yourself. The whole entire law, the whole Old Testament, where they're talking about laws and setting laws for the Israelites, and all this laws and more laws, they can all be summed up in one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Everything can be summed up in this one command. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command. Jesus even agrees with this statement. Jesus himself agrees with this statement. Yes, Jesus agrees with this statement. Not an ordinary person, but Jesus agrees with the fact that love your neighbor as yourself is the biggest command. Well, actually, Jesus doesn't agree that it's the most important command, but love your neighbor as yourself. Luke 6:37. What it means, love your neighbor as yourself, it means do as it says in Luke 6:37. That's what it means by love your neighbor as yourself. Luke 6:37. "Do not judge others, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn others, or it will all come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven." This is what Jesus says. Jesus says that if you don't want to be judged, then don't judge others. If you don't want it to all come back against you, then don't condemn others. And do forgive others if you want to be forgiven. So love your neighbor as yourself. Do as you want others to do to you. Do what you want others to do to you. Jesus agrees with that statement. And he also says to love your neighbor as yourself in Matthew. Actually, Matthew, I believe it's 39 and 40. Matthew 22, 39 and 40. These verses say, a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Well, if you go back a step further and go back to Matthew 22, 37 and 38, it says, Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. But Paul, here in Galatians, he's telling us that the whole law can be summed up in one command, to love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law. But Jesus says that there's two laws. I'm agreeing with Jesus. But love your neighbor as yourself is as equally important as the first command that Jesus says, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. Because in verse 39, he says, a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. So we are supposed to love the Lord your God with all our heart, all our soul, and all our mind. But also love your neighbor as yourself. This is a second commandment. It is equally important as the first one that Jesus says, even though he named it first. In verse 38, it says, this is the first and greatest commandment. Of course, he's speaking about love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. But like I said, he doesn't stop there. He says that a second commandment is as equally important as the first one. So, even if this is the first and greatest commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, you should still love your neighbor as yourself, because it's equally important. It's equally important. The whole law can be summed up in this one command, love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law can be summed up in two commandments, actually. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. But a second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. The entire law. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command, love your neighbor as yourself, Paul says. But yes, you can love your neighbor as yourself all you want. But you cannot forget the one that Jesus adds. In Matthew 22:37. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. You cannot forget about God, even if you're loving your neighbor as yourself, because Paul says that the whole law can be summed up in this one command. You can't forget about God. You have to still love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, because this is the first and greatest commandment. Yes, loving your neighbor as yourself is equally important, and you should still do that. But loving the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind is something that you shouldn't forget. It's something that you shouldn't forget. So yes, you're reading this verse and you're saying, oh, so if I love my neighbor as myself, I will be good. I will be righteous. First of all, no, Isaiah 64:5, we are constant sinners. So first of all, no, loving your neighbor as yourself does not make you a non-sinner. We are constant sinners. And second of all, Jesus said not a normal person, but Jesus himself in the flesh said in Matthew 22:37, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. So no, loving your neighbor as yourself only does not make you righteous. It does not make you righteous by just loving your neighbor as yourself. You can't forget loving God. You can't forget the Lord your God. You can't forget to love him with all your heart, soul, and mind. You can't forget. Thank you so much for watching this video. This verse was Galatians 5:14. This verse says, for the whole law can be summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more verses Monday through Friday. And turn on those post notifications while you're at it to be notified when those verses do get uploaded. Like I said, Monday through Friday. That's pretty much it. And I will see you tomorrow. Oh, wait. I forgot one thing. Here's a little clip on how to turn on your post notifications. And now, I will see you tomorrow. Goodbye.